Hi everyone, this is Glenda Ganzon and welcome to my Human Anatomy and Physiology class. And for today's lesson, I'm going to be discussing the cellular level of organization, particularly the outermost part of the cell, which is the cell membrane. So stay tuned. Despite of the differences in structure and function, all living cells in multicellular organisms have a surrounding cell membrane. As the outer layer of your skin separates your body from its environment, the cell membrane, also known as the plasma membrane, separates the inner contents of a cell from its exterior environment. This cell membrane provides a protective barrier around the cell and regulates which materials can pass in or out. Here is the structure and composition of the cell membrane. The cell membrane is an extremely pliable structure composed primarily of back-to-back phospholipids. This is a bilayer. Cholesterol is also present, which contributes to the fluidity of the membrane. And there are various proteins embedded within the membrane that have a variety of functions. A single phospholipid molecule has a phosphate group on one end, which is called as the head, and two side-by-side chains of fatty acids that make up the lipid tails. The phosphate group is a negatively charged, making the head polar and hydrophilic or water-loving. In this picture is a phospholipid structure. A phospholipid molecule consists of a polar phosphate, which is the head and which is hydrophilic, and a non-polar lipid, which is the tail, and it is also hydrophobic. Unsaturated fatty acids result in kinks in the hydrophobic tails. A hydrophilic molecule or region of a molecule is one that is attracted to water. The phosphate heads are thus attracted to the water molecules of both the extracellular and the intracellular environments. The lipid tails, on the other hand, are uncharged or nonpolar and are hydrophobic or water-fearing. So what is a hydrophobic molecule? It is a molecule or region of a molecule that repels and is repelled by water. Some lipid tails consist of saturated fatty acids and some contain unsaturated fatty acids. This combination adds to a fluidity of the tails that are constantly in motion. Phospholipids are thus amphipathic molecules. So what is an amphipathic molecule? It is a molecule that is one that contains both a hydrophilic and hydrophobic region. In fact, soap works to remove oil and grease stains because it has an amphipathic properties. The hydrophilic portion can dissolve in water while the hydrophobic portion can trap grease in micelles that then can be washed away. This is a picture of phospholipid bilayer. The phospholipid bilayer consists of two adjacent sheets of phospholipids arranged tail to tail. The hydrophobic tails associate with one another, forming the interior of the membrane, and the polar heads contact the fluid inside and outside of the cell. So the cell membrane consists of two adjacent layers of phospholipids. The lipid tails of one layer face the lipid tails of the other layer, meeting at the interface of the two layers. The phospholipid heads face outward and one layer exposed to the interior of the cell and one layer exposed to the exterior. Because the phosphate groups are polar and hydrophilic, they are attracted to water in the intracellular fluid. So what is an intracellular fluid or ICF? It is a fluid interior of the cell. The phosphate groups are also attracted to the extracellular fluid, and this extracellular fluid or ECF is the fluid environment outside the enclosure of the cell membrane. We have another one, which is the interstitial fluid, or IF, and this is a term given to the extracellular fluid not contained within the blood vessels because the lipid tails are hydrophobic. They meet in the inner region of the membrane, excluding watery intracellular and extracellular fluid from this space. The cell membrane then has many proteins as well as other lipids such as cholesterol that are associated with the phospholipid bilayer. An important feature of the membrane is that it remains fluid. The lipids and proteins in the cell membrane are not rigidly locked in place. This is the structure of the cell membrane. The cell membrane of the cell is a phospholipid bilayer containing many different molecule components, including proteins and cholesterol, and some with carbohydrate groups attached with it. So in membrane proteins, the lipid bilayer forms the basis of the cell membrane, but it is peppered though out of various proteins. Two different types of proteins that are commonly associated with the cell membranes are the integral protein and the peripheral protein. As its name suggests, an integral protein is a protein that is embedded in the membrane. A channel protein also is an example of an integral protein that selectively allows particular materials such as certain ions to pass into or out of the cell. Another important group of integral proteins are cell recognition proteins, which serve to mark a cell's identity so that it can be recognized by other cells. A receptor is a type of recognition protein that can selectively bind a specific molecule outside the cell, and its binding induces a chemical reaction within the cell. A ligand is a specific molecule that binds to and activates a receptor. So integral proteins serve dual roles as both a receptor and an ion channel. One example of receptor-ligand interaction is the receptors or the nerve cells that bind neurotransmitters such as dopamine. When dopamine molecules binds to a dopamine receptor protein, a channel within the transmembrane protein opens to allow certain ions to flow into the cell. Some integral membranes are glycoproteins. So what is a glycoprotein? It is a protein that has carbohydrate molecules attached which extend into the extracellular matrix. The attached carbohydrate tags on glycoproteins aid in cell recognition. The carbohydrates that extend from membrane proteins and even from the membrane lipids collectively form the Glycocalyx. So what is a Glycocalyx? It is a fuzzy appearing coating around the cell formed from glycoproteins and other carbohydrates attached to the cell membrane. So the Glycocalyx can have various roles. For example, it may have molecules that allow the cell to bind to another cell. Also, it may contain receptors for hormones, or it might have enzymes to break down nutrients. The glycocalyx or the glycocalyces also found in a person's body are products that a person's genetic makeup. So they give each of the individuals trillions of cells the identity of belonging in the person's body, and this identity is the primary way that person's immune defenses cell know not to attack the person's own body cells, but it also is the reason organs donated by another person might be rejected. And the last type of protein that can be found in the cell membrane is the peripheral proteins. They are typically found in the inner or outer surface of the lipid bilayer but can also be attached to the internal or external surface of an integral protein. So these proteins typically perform a specific function for the cell, and some peripheral proteins on the surface of intestinal cells, for example, act as digestive enzymes to break down nutrients to sizes that can pass through the cells into the bloodstream. So here ends my discussion about the cellular level of organization, particularly on the structure and composition of the cell membrane and the different proteins which can be found in the cell membrane. So if you have any question, please write it in the comment section down below and I'll be glad to answer them all. And once again, thank you so much for watching this video and for listening to my lecture. Until my next video, bye!